In the cold, early months of 1918, a new kind of soldier began to appear on the Western Front. They were tall, confident, and maddeningly optimistic. They called themselves Doughboys, and they were the leading edge of the American Expeditionary Forces, sent to France to break the bloody stalemate of the Great War. The German High Command watched their arrival with a mixture of contempt and strategic concern. They viewed the Americans as a mob of amateurs, undisciplined cowboys who knew nothing of the sophisticated, industrial slaughter of modern trench warfare. To prove their point and to shatter the morale of this upstart army before it could become a real threat, they decided to teach the Americans a lesson. They selected a division, the 26th Yankee Division, and threw them into one of the most infamous and brutal sectors on the entire front, a place the French called the Man-Eater and the Devil's Furnace. It was a sector specifically designed to break armies. What the Germans didn't realize was that in this crucible of fire, gas, and terror, they would not break the American spirit. Instead, they would forge it into a weapon. This is the hidden story of the 26th Division's baptism by fire, a brutal tale of how a division of confident amateurs was thrown into hell and emerged as an army of hardened killers, ready to win the war. By February 1918, the situation for the Allies was dire. Russia had collapsed on the Eastern Front, freeing up 500,000 veteran German soldiers to be transferred to the West. Germany was planning a massive, war-winning spring offensive, and they now held a dangerous numerical superiority. America had declared war a year earlier, but its army was still arriving, still training, and completely unproven in combat. The French and British commanders were desperate for reinforcements but were also deeply skeptical of the American troops' abilities. To them, the Doughboys were an unknown quantity, full of bravado but lacking the grim, hard-won experience of 4 years of trench warfare. It was in this atmosphere of desperation and doubt that the American 26th Division was chosen for a critical mission. Comprised of National Guard units primarily from New England, they were nicknamed the Yankee Division. They were among the first complete American divisions to arrive in France, and they were itching for a fight. Their commander, Major General Clarence Edwards, was ambitious and fiercely proud of his men. He lobbied hard to get his division into a real, active sector of the front, eager to prove that his Yankees could fight as well as any European army. He got his wish, and it was a wish he would come to regret. On February 6, 1918, the 26th Division began taking over a sector of the front line from the French. The place was called the Chemin de Dames, or the Ladies' Path. The idyllic name belied a horrifying reality. This was a long, high ridge north of the Aisne River that had been the scene of some of the most ferocious and costly fighting of the war. In 1917, a disastrous French offensive here had resulted in over 180,000 casualties in a matter of weeks, a failure so catastrophic it triggered widespread mutinies throughout the French army. The French soldiers who were relieved by the Americans looked at them with a mixture of pity and grim amusement. They knew what this place was. The trenches were a maze of collapsing tunnels and waterlogged ditches. No Man's Land was a churned, lunar landscape of shell craters and tangled barbed wire, littered with the skeletal remains of men and horses. But the real danger of the Chemin de Dames was its sophistication. The Germans held the high ground, looking down on the Allied positions. Their artillery was pre-sighted on every trench, every crossroads, and every dugout. They had perfected the art of the trench raid, sending elite stormtrooper units across no man's land at night to kill, capture, and terrorize the defenders. And most terrifying of all, the sector was saturated with poison gas. The soldiers of the 26th Division, fresh from training camps, marched into this nightmare. Their initial feeling was one of adventure. They were finally at the front. But the reality of their new home set in quickly. The constant, gnawing tension was the first lesson. There was no silence on the Chemin de Dames. The day was punctuated by the random, nerve-shredding crack of a sniper's rifle. The night was a cacophony of machine gun fire, star shells illuminating the desolate landscape in a ghostly green light, and the ever-present, earth-shaking crump of artillery shells. Death was casual and impersonal. A man could be talking to his friend one moment and be obliterated by a random shell the next. The German artillery was methodical and cruel. They engaged in what was known as harassing fire, lobbing shells into the American positions at random intervals, day and night, specifically to prevent sleep and shatter nerves. But their true artistry was in the use of poison gas. For the men of the 26th, this was a new and profound form of terror. They had trained with gas masks, but training was nothing like the real thing. The attack would often come at night, announced by a series of quiet plops as the gas shells landed. Then, the hiss of the gas spreading, and the desperate shouts of gas, gas. Men would scramble in the dark, fumbling for their masks, their hearts pounding with a primal fear. The gas, usually mustard gas or phosgene, was heavier than air and would sink into the trenches and dugouts, clinging to the mud and uniforms for days. It was an invisible killer, a soldier who was too slow to get his mask on, or whose mask had a faulty seal, would suffer a horrifying death. His lungs burned out from the inside. The German High Command, observing the arrival of the amateur Yankee division, saw a perfect opportunity. They decided to launch a major, meticulously planned trench raid to test the Americans' mettle, capture prisoners for intelligence, and, most importantly, terrorize them into submission. They wanted to prove that the Americans could not stand up to elite German stormtroopers. The date was set for the night of April 20th, 1918. The target was the village of Sicapri, held by the 102nd Infantry Regiment of the 26th Division. The German plan was a model of their deadly efficiency. A short, violent artillery barrage would isolate the village, cutting telephone wires and preventing reinforcements. Then, under the cover of a creeping barrage of shells that moved forward just ahead of them, 500 elite stormtroopers would assault the American positions from multiple directions. For the American soldiers in Sicapri, the night began like any other, with cold rain and the distant rumble of artillery. Then, suddenly, the world exploded. The German barrage was unlike anything they had ever experienced. Shells rained down, collapsing trenches, destroying machine gun nests, and burying men alive in their dugouts. Telephone lines to the rear were severed almost immediately. The defenders were cut off, isolated in a sea of fire and steel. As the barrage lifted, the stormtroopers attacked. They moved with a chilling professionalism, using flamethrowers to clear out dugouts and lobbing potato masher, stick grenades into American positions. The fighting descended into a brutal, hand-to-hand struggle in the darkness. The Americans, though outnumbered and outmaneuvered, fought back with a ferocity that stunned the Germans. They used their rifles, bayonets, trench knives, and even their fists. In one section of the trench, a German stormtrooper came face to face with an American corporal. The German lunged with his bayonet, but the American parried it with his rifle and then killed him with a single, powerful blow from his entrenching tool. The battle for Sicapri raged for hours, a confused and desperate melee in the mud and the dark. The Germans succeeded in capturing parts of the village and taking over 180 American prisoners. From a tactical perspective, their raid was a success. They had proven they could penetrate the American lines. But from a strategic perspective, it was a colossal failure. The German High Command expected the raid to shatter the 26th Division's morale. They expected the Americans to become timid, to fear the night, and to lose their will to fight. The exact opposite happened. The Battle of Sicapri, though a tactical defeat, enraged the Yankee division. They were humiliated and furious. They had been beaten, and they were determined to get their revenge. The experience didn't break them. It hardened them. The naive bravado of their arrival was burned away and replaced with a cold, professional anger. They learned the brutal lessons of the front line in a single bloody night. They learned to dig their trenches deeper, to create overlapping fields of machine gun fire, and to never ever underestimate their enemy again. Most importantly, they learned to hate. An officer of the 104th Infantry, another regiment that suffered a similar raid, captured this transformation perfectly. Before the raid, he said, his men viewed the war as a great adventure. After, he wrote, each man had a personal account to settle with the Boche. They had become killers. The German lesson had backfired spectacularly. Instead of creating a timid and broken enemy, they had created a division of hardened veterans thirsty for payback. For the rest of their time on the Chemin, the 26th Division gave as good as they got. They began launching their own trench raids, becoming adept at the same brutal nighttime warfare the Germans had used against them. American patrols, armed with shotguns and automatic rifles, began to dominate no man's land, ambushing German patrols and bringing back their own prisoners. The sector that was designed to be a school for American humiliation became a graduate course in modern combat. The psychological toll was immense. The soldiers lived in a constant state of high alert, their nerves frayed by endless shelling and the fear of gas. They lived in filth, surrounded by rats, lice, and the omnipresent stench of death and decay. The letters they sent home, which had once been full of cheerful optimism, now took on a darker, more somber tone. They wrote of friends lost, of the horrors they had witnessed, and of a deep, soul-crushing weariness. They had seen the face of industrial war, and it had changed them forever. Yet they did not break. Their performance on the Chemin proved to the skeptical French and British commanders, and more importantly to themselves, that the American soldier could endure the worst the Western Front had to offer and keep fighting. When the 26th Division was finally relieved in late March and moved to a quieter sector, they were no longer a division of amateurs. They were a veteran combat unit, bloodied, scarred, but unbroken. The story of the Yankee Division's baptism by fire at the Chemin is more than just a historical footnote. It is a crucial chapter in the story of America's entry into World War I. It represents the moment when the theoretical power of the American Army became a proven reality on the battlefield. The German High Command's plan to teach the Americans a lesson was rooted in a profound and ultimately fatal misunderstanding of their new enemy. They saw the American soldiers' confidence as arrogance, their lack of experience as incompetence. They failed to grasp the incredible speed with which a motivated and well-equipped force could adapt and learn. The Chemin was a brutal teacher, but the 26th Division were quick students. They learned that bravery alone was not enough. Survival depended on discipline, on digging in, on mastering the grim science of trench warfare. They learned to respect the devastating power of artillery and the silent terror of poison gas. They learned that the real enemy was often not the German soldier in the trench opposite, but the exhaustion, the disease, and the constant psychological pressure of living under the threat of instant, random death. This experience was replicated across the front as more American divisions arrived and were fed into the line. Each one went through its own baptism by fire, learning the same hard lessons that the 26th had learned on the Chemin de Dames. The German strategic mistake was not in launching the raids. It was in failing to understand the effect they would have. Instead of instilling fear, the attacks instilled a hardened resolve. The American Expeditionary Forces developed a reputation for aggressive patrolling and a preference for open warfare over the static life of the trenches, partly because of this early experience. They were determined to never again be caught on the receiving end of a surprise attack. This aggressive spirit would serve them well just a few months later, during the great Allied counteroffensives of the summer and fall of 1918. When the time came to go on the attack, at battles like Saint-Mihiel and the Meuse-Argonne, the veterans of the Chemin de Dames were ready. They had been to hell and back, and they were no longer afraid. Ultimately, the story of the 26th Division on the Chemin de Dames is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. It's a story of how ordinary men, civilians in uniform from the towns and cities of New England, were thrown into the most sophisticated meat grinder in human history and refused to be broken. They arrived in France as confident amateurs and left the Chemin de Dames as something else entirely, a professional army. The Germans had intended the sector to be a display of their own superiority, a demonstration designed to break the will of their new foe. Instead, it became the forge that tempered the American army into the weapon that would help seal Germany's defeat. The sector that was designed to be the end of America's confidence became the very beginning of its legend. And it all started on that quiet, deadly ridge in France, on the infamous Ladies' Path, where a division of Yankees got their first brutal taste of war and decided they would not be intimidated.